All right, give me just a moment to get the right PDF up, and then we'll be burning through this, in theory.
Hey, sorry.
Hey,
Hey,
Lily,
Lily.
Arachne,
Yeah,
everyone. How are all of you doing?
I've got a bit of a cold, but I just want to tell you guys that there's a whole bunch of Bob Dylan songs that I
That's very
Hey, hey,
acceptable.
hey.
They
Did
call back
everybody
up.
contemplate that they have infinite bodies?
Infinite bodies.
Nah, just Bob Dylan. Been tangled
Apparently
up
we've
with
only
glue.
been contemplating Bob Dylan. It would seem to be the case.
That's right.
No, I've been holding on to that all week because I actually realized that, but we went overtime last time, so I didn't really have the chance to say anything. So
Fair enough. Who am I to judge?
I'll change my nickname just for you, Lily. If you know this Bob Dylan tune.
oh, I don't know that Bob Dylan tune, but I know Rob Halford and Breaking the Law.
So, check it out. It's the Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest. It's a pretty. It's a more folky uh, twist, but it's a really solid song.
Oh, cool. I'll have to look that up.
All right, and with that, I think I'm going to say that we're going to go ahead and actually kick into Spinoza Practical Philosophy. I had us. Where the fuck did I have us? I don't even know anymore. Page 20. Was it page 20 or 21? Where am I off?
Yeah, page 20,
Okay.
beginning.
How
is
does
still
consciousness? Oh, the end of the page. The end of the page. Okay. Oh yeah, no, we did read the previous one. Yeah, the three illusions. Okay. Excellent. Let's get Craigabot in here. Come on, just get in here. Join. What the fuck, dude?
Now recording.
Yes, they do that so everyone knows they are recording, which is lovely. How's everyone doing? We are going to jump into Spinoza Practical Philosophy. We're making our way further and further and further and deeper into Deleuze's take on Spinoza. We're at the bottom of page 20. For those following along, let me share my screen, and we will just really get to it. Does anyone want to sort of follow up from last week as I click my last few little clicks? Or do we just want to dive in?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to remind ourselves what's going on, because it is quite dense, and I think we need to keep track, where we're coming from and where we're going to.
Right. Can do.
So basically,
Spinoza was a philosopher. There we go. All right. Your
there
turn,
you go.
Derek.
So we're in chapter 2. So we had a chapter. The first chapter was like his life, and I think that the two can't be disconnected. There is the practical philosophy is a kind of philosophy of life, as Deleuze will say later. But here, the question in chapter 2 is, why was he so hated? So that's the question. He says, no philosopher was ever more worthy, but neither was any philosopher more maligned and hated. And he said there are three reasons for this. He said he was accused of materialism, immoralism, and atheism. And each of these spring from a particular kind of thesis in relation to his practical philosophy. So the one we're reading, so in this chapter, basically, he goes through each of these theses, which lead to these accusations of materialism, immoralism, and atheism.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is the one we're in at the moment, which is what Deleuze entitles it a devaluation of consciousness in favour of thought, and this is Spinoza, the materialist. And basically, this starts from the kind of the switching around from. Basically, it's a kind of, as he says in the title of this section, the devaluation of consciousness. So here, what we have is the consciousness, so conscious thought in which we think directly about something, whether it's kind of the bodies or ideas or whatever, is kind of replaced, or it's kind of replaced by a kind of, by something. I mean, in this, what he does, he takes the body, the body as a model. And there's a famous quote, we do not know what the body can do. And so in the relation to the body, we have lack of knowledge. Now, how this works is that he's also going to develop some thinking in relation to thinking. But it doesn't mean that the body is kind of dominant over thought. It means that they are, and again, this is a term that that Deleuze used, which is parallelism. There's a parallel between the body and between thinking, and he said from knowing what the body can do, we can know what the thinking of the unconscious is. So it goes from consciousness to the unconscious. So this devaluation of consciousness is a valuation of consciousness. Oh, sorry, the unconscious. So I think that was the basic kind of idea. But then he talks in more kind of detail about the kind of relationship between the two. And then which kind of, he said basically, he said, I mean, it's kind of, he says fundamentally, he said the idea is that in the kind of model where consciousness rules everything, then we end up being unhappy and anxious, and that I'm just trying to, obviously I'm not going to can't go through this in fantastic detail.
I mean, you're making an effort, that's for sure.
Yeah, an effort. Yeah, but just to finish off, I mean, the last paragraph we read was about the question was, how does consciousness calm its anguish? So he said we're kind of subject to illusion. We think the world is great, because fundamentally underneath that we're subject to anxiety. And he says, how does consciousness calm its anguish? And he says it's subject to three illusions: illusion of final causes, and the illusion of free decrees, and the theological illusion. And if we want to try and, it's always if we can try and understand this. It's like it's difficult to kind of give a kind of overall.
Well, I think we can pop back just one paragraph to what he's talking about, and like, again, because this is the Spinoza the materialist, is like we're like taking the three Spinozas and like attacking them and talking about them, and this is the Spinoza the materialist, because it's his play is not only about the thought and consciousness, but also how we consider these things and how they sort of exist. He uses the example, Deleuze uses the example of the unconscious, which Spinoza is very much pushing. The phrase, as he says throughout this, is sort of the idea of we stand amazed before consciousness, but the truly surprising thing is rather the body, the line from Nietzsche. And so he goes on to sort of have a couple lines in here that I think are really super important. He has the line in here, the fact is that consciousness is by nature the locus of an illusion. Its nature is such that it registers effects but knows nothing of causes. The order of causes is defined by this, and he runs through, and he starts breaking things out. We are in a condition such that we only take in what happens to our body, what happens to our mind. That is the effect of a body on our body, the effect of an idea on our idea. But this is only our body in its own relation, our mind in its own relation. This is his play of talking about this materialist conception, not just of the body, but like a very materialist conception of the mind as well, the unconsciousness and things like that.
Is he saying that the whole idea of consciousness is an illusion, right? That there is only the body, and that there are thoughts, but they're not separate ultimately?
I don't know if I'd say consciousness is an illusion. He calls it the locus of an illusion, is how Deleuze is talking about it. So it's more again thinking of the after effects, the effects rather than causes. Right.
But if you think of consciousness, you automatically think of a dualism of being separate from the body. But he's saying just the opposite, that illusion of a dualism is what consciousness is doing to itself. So he's saying that it's just one substance, one body, and the thinking that occurs,
well, and this is what he's saying Spinoza does, and it's the next paragraph here is Spinoza begins talking about how consciousness can calm its anguish, as he says. And that's very much in the ethics, that's in the kind of throughout a lot of Spinoza's writing. And this is one of those things that really is pushing him. And the next paragraph we're going to get into is long, so it's actually really worth us like going through a lot of this. His line here, it's basically consciousness needs to calm its anguish. How does it do this? It does this because of this triple illusion. The first is the illusion of final causes, which takes effects for causes. The body and the mind, the consciousness doesn't see causes. We only see effects, but we take effects as causes. It construes the effect of a body on our body as the final cause of its own actions. It as the sort of quasi-cause. This is continuing from sort of all of his works all the way through. This has been a run through for Deleuze, but Spinoza is always who he's referenced for this. And he says, and it's this way it will take itself as the first cause and invoke its power over the body. This is the illusion of free decrees, the idea that you have free say over what happens or what you're doing. Where consciousness can no longer imagine itself to be first cause, nor the organizer of ends, it invokes a God endowed with understanding and volition, this thing consciousness wishes itself to be or thinks itself of, operating by means of final causes or free decrees in order to prepare for a man a world commensurate with his glory and his punishments, which is the theological illusion. These are the three illusions that sort of that consciousness creates in order to calm this anguish that it simply is only able to see sort of the effect of things and not the causes.
Yeah, I think the basic one of the basic ideas is, as we said earlier, is the notion of parallelism. So the mind and the body parallel each other, but so you can learn about the mind from the body. And the basic idea that Spinoza and Deleuze talks about is this notion of composition and decomposition. So when a body meets another body, they can either combine to good effect, and that is a composition, or they can combine to a bad effect, and that is a decomposition. And he's going to talk about that further. I mean, he doesn't go into fantastic detail here. So equally, the mind, when it meets an idea, so thought, when it meets an idea, a good idea, it can elevate, and it's equally, if it's a kind of, let's call it a bad idea. Well, these are terms that Spinoza actually uses, bad idea. Then it can depress. It can do the opposite. And that fundamental. Well, let me just see. That's the subject of the second section of this. But I think that's the important idea to keep in mind.
Yeah, and
so
I think he even sums it up at the end here with the line from the Ethics itself, where Spinoza says, "The infant believes he freely wants milk, the angry child that he freely wants vengeance, and the timid freely wants flight." I added the freely wants because that's the writing. It's this idea that the sort of effect of a ton of shit that's happening, we think our want is that our want made. If you've got kids or had kids, Jesus Christ, does this scream absolutely truth? The child believes they want things. That's just them like assigning these terms. It's just adding these things in. They're seeing the effect and creating themselves as the cause.
Yeah, I think the idea there is that we are the cause. We are the final cause. So the feeling of hunger is it's our choice. It's from us that happens. Equally, he says the drunk, the one who speaks, the one who drinks, gets drunk, and then speaks things he later regrets. But they're a choice that he's made. So that these are his choice. They're not. So I mean, fundamentally, it's kind of we haven't really got to that bit yet. But what it's about is that it's our combination with alcohol that creates this bad effect of let's say insulting behaviour or whatever it might be. So with the kind of illusion of final cause.
To me, it's almost the opposite. The line about the drunk is, the drunk believes that it was from a free decision. He said terrible things that he regrets and wishes he had not said. It's introducing the idea of guilt. This is this section of the Ethics is talking about sort of that guilt we visit on ourselves because we believe the cause was our own choosing. It was from free decree. And as it was from free decree, we then place on ourselves the onus of having the decision go forward as being ours. This is the illusion of the free decree, which gives us that. Anything we don't have power over, we throw to God, who himself absolutely has free decree. And this is the idea that this thing is sort of going on. Again, it's not that consciousness is lying to itself. It's the line nor does it suffice to say consciousness deludes itself. This is not an ideological veil over your eyes. This isn't the trickery. It's that consciousness is inseparable from the triple illusion that constitutes it: the illusion of finality, illusion of freedom, and theological illusion. But it's certainly not saying that the infant is making a choice. It's that the infant believes he's making a choice.
Yeah, I don't think guilt plays any part in this, though. I think it is the final cause, and it is the free decree. It's like it says what it says. The drunk believes that it's from a free decision of the mind that he speaks the things.
That's the illusion.
So
Yes.
we should not. So it's not anything about feeling guilty. It's about he feels that it's a free decision. Whereas the point of this section is this notion of composition, decomposition, and what I would say is that the drunk. So that in what a drunk needs is alcohol to be a drunk. So it's that kind of choice of taking something that has a bad effect on the body, whereas
So
the
the
drunk
line,
feels it's their choice. This decision to speak in this way is their choice.
yeah, the line just before that says that the consciousness is only a dream with one's eyes open. So does that indicate that that there is no, the person, the infant, the drunk is not making a choice,
Correct.
but it's predetermined by
Predetermined is a
other
different
forces.
thing. Predetermined's a different thing. We're not going quite that far, but it's we're confusing the effect for the cause, and in doing so, this is what consciousness and the illusions that constitute it create. And so the belief that the choice was made is the setup.
Yeah, I mean, with the drunk, you could say so. The effect is this speaking in a certain way, saying something that he later regrets. But the cause of that is drunkenness. It is drink, and that fundamentally is a decision to drink.
It's no more a decision to drink, though, than you could slightly reword this and say the drunk believes he freely wants the alcohol. Like this is very much what he's getting at, is that the drunk believes it was a free decision of the mind. If I go and I get drunk and I say to Jack, I go, "You're a fucking asshole. I never want to see you again." The next day I regret this. I wish I had not said those things because I believe I had a choice, or that the choice was my drink. And the drink made me say them. I wish I hadn't drank so much. But that thing again, that there is no freely wants. There is no, the illusion of free decrees is the illusion of free decrees. There's no free decree. It's like, it's not like you can go, oh yeah, no, I don't have any free decrees over this stuff, but I do over those things, is not really the point.
Yeah, I think all right, okay.
I think we disagree on this one, which is good. This will be fun.
Yeah, I think go around in circles. I mean, fundamentally, the final cause is that the end is the cause. So the end is, sorry, the end is the effect. Sorry, yeah. Well, the end is the cause. Yeah, that's exactly it. The final cause. The end is the cause. So the Greek word for that obviously is telos. A telos is that. So the end is this speaking, this drunken behavior, and it's been free decision of the mind. This is to do with, again, it's to do with thinking. It's like this. Well, because I did it. It must be correct. So there's no understanding of the kind of the underpinning kind of mechanisms that lead to this. But I think this will, I don't know. I think it will become clearer, but
so do I.
Perhaps go on.
So do I. So we will move on. This is fun. I like when we disagree, Derek. All right.
Hey,
Jack, go for it. Sorry. We're talking too much. Go for it, Jack. You're very polite.
Okay. Well, you're very kind to notice. Yeah, just for me, it's more like it's the body and mind as distinguished from like just consciousness, or like you can compare it to like idealism versus phenomenology, right? They're, it's kind of different, like mind versus consciousness. But the only thing I was going to add is I think what's kind of interesting, right? So like for Deleuze's take on Spinoza, right? Spinoza it's a philosophy of life where life is productive, and in that production is the ethics, right? And you kind of get that between the ethics versus a morality, right? What's the difference? So this was just my only point. Is I think it's interesting that for Deleuze, right, the ethics of Spinoza um, is basically, right, the three things it denounces, or the three things it's not going to do, right? It's not going to work through consciousness, so it's not like Kant using the categorical imperative, or like a phenomenology. It's not going to work through values, right? Which is like a very Nietzschean point. And it's not going to work through sad passions, right? Which would be like more, like where he began the book with the aestheticism, like how to impoverish oneself to kind of suffer into morality. So it's going to be an ethics that produces um, effects, and it's not going to work through those three things. It's going to work differently. That's all I wanted to add.
I'm going to read what Arachne wrote real quick, and then we'll get going so everyone can have their say, since Derek and I do talk and tend to monopolize. A way to get an understanding of parallelism, as Deleuze understands Spinoza's metaphysical project, is to think of substance as territory, and the expression of modes of affections of the attributes as respective descriptions of deterritorialization, of which consciousness and body are two, and we have yet described. Hence, our experience of consciousness is the experience of the constitutive reterritorialization that ensues after expression. On the other aspect of it, form, which goes together with substance in each concrete assemblage, is either deformalized or formalized. Substance and form are parallel and correspond to the non-parallel units of content and expression. At least this is their use of Yelmslev's linguistics. I do love Yelmslev. What's so special about Spinoza's philosophy and theology is not so much that God and nature are equivocated. This is not a very radical idea. The conception of nature or naturalism as an essential aspect of bodies or desires equally problematic as a God's reign. A current of etymology of nature refers to genitality. Instead, what's so special is how substance territory expresses infinite entities while always remaining within the substance territory. It's kind of skipping ahead, and you're actually technically moving to the other Spinoza book, which I like, but yeah, that's good shit. All right, to continue. This is a big paragraph. We're going to end up having to take a long time through this, so off we go. It is still necessary for consciousness itself to have a cause. Spinoza sometimes defines desire as, quote, appetite together with consciousness of the appetite, end quote. But he specifies that this is only a normal definition of desire and that consciousness adds nothing to appetite. Quote, we neither strive for, nor will, neither want, nor desire anything because we judge it to be good. On the contrary, we judge something to be good because we strive for it, will it, want it, and desire it, end quote. We need then to arrive at a real definition of desire, one that at the same time shows the cause by which consciousness is hollowed out, as it were, in the appetitive process. Appetitive is a great word. Now, the appetite is nothing else but the effort by which each thing strives to persevere in its being, each body in extension, each mind or idea in thought. Conatus. But because this effort prompts us to act differently according to the objects encountered, we should say that it is, at every moment, determined by the affections that come from the objects. These determinative affections are necessarily the cause of the consciousness of the conatus. And since the affection are not separable from a movement by which they cause us to go to a greater or lesser perfection, joy and sadness, depending on whether the thing encountered enters into composition with us or, on the contrary, tends to decompose us, consciousness appears as the continual awareness of this passage from greater to lesser, or from lesser to greater as a witness of the variations and determinations of the conatus functioning in relation to other bodies or other ideas. The object that agrees with my nature determines me to form a superior totality that includes us, the object, and myself. The object that does not agree with me jeopardizes my cohesion and tends to divide me into subsets, which, in the extreme case, enter into relations that are incompatible with my constitutive relation, death. Consciousness is the passage, or rather, the awareness of the passage, from these less potent totalities to more potent ones, and vice versa. It is purely transitive, but it is not a property of the whole or of any specific whole. It has only an informational value. And what is more, the information is necessarily confused and distorted. Here again, Nietzsche is strictly Spinozan when he writes, quote, "The greater activity is unconscious. Unconsciousness usually only appears then a whole I'll start that over. The greater activity is unconsciousness. Unconsciousness usually only appears when a whole wants to subordinate itself to a superior whole. It is primarily the consciousness of this superior whole, or of reality extended to the ego. Consciousness is born in relation to a being of which we could be a function. It is the means by which we incorporate into that being." All right, we will end up going through, I think, all of this. I'm going to say, Derek, before you or I get going, does anyone have a note or anything to say? Because once we get going, Derek, and we will get going here, because this is because affect was mentioned, just saying.
Yeah, I have a comment.
Please.
He uses the word necessary in this passage, right? And so he is emphasizing that all the things that are going on in the body and the mind are necessary. So maybe that's less of a strong word than determinism, but it is kind of like a determinism, but it is necessary for things to happen as they occur. But we have a consciousness that that thinks that we have a sense of agency.
Yeah, if we go back, because you were actually with us, and I think all of us here were part of the logic of sense reading. I have to go back to that because that was really where Deleuze started stopping using destiny and talked about necessity and playing with the both of these things, with the Klineman, how these things sort of come to be, the cleavage of causality, as he talked about it for the Epicureans. He is playing with a type of that. I'm very hesitant to say that it's a determinism in sort of the physicalist or traditional way, though. I leave it to others to comment, but I leave it a bit more open than just it's determinist, because there is some level of sort of cause and effect playing here, but like the cause and effect we're able to see, it's much more like Nietzsche's line in The Gay Science, like the cause and effect is this thing that no one's ever been able to explain a push, as Nietzsche says. So there's a lot more happening that we're not able to really take in or aren't taking in as part of understanding a thing. Go for it, Derek.
Yeah, I was going to say, again, we need to remember what this section's about. So it's about the devaluation of consciousnness. It's not about it perhaps is about the evaluation, but it's about the devaluation of consciousness. So he's fundamentally saying, in the bit leading up to this, he's given this kind of, the body and the unconscious are the kind of the things that are given value, whereas the consciousness, which is in the up to now has kind of ruled the body and ruled the mind, is being devalued. So that's the kind of point of what leads up to this, this final paragraph. But the point he begins this final paragraph by saying it's necessary for consciousness itself to have a cause. So he's not kind of getting rid of consciousness. He said, this is a kind of fact of things. The way that we have thought, that we kind of somehow disposed to think. And he says it's necessary for consciousness itself, because everything, it's not necessary, it's It's necessary because everything has a cause. I think that's the point. So he says it's necessary. It's still necessary for consciousness itself to have a cause. And then that opening sentence is the point of this paragraph, I would say. So it's looking at consciousness and actually what causes it and what's its role. What is its role? Because we think it's one thing, whereas according to Spinoza, it's not what we think it is. Because he says consciousness only knows effects; it doesn't know causes. So what he wants to do is kind of get at the heart of consciousness itself.
Yeah, and he gives a crisp, like very specific line definition. The determinative affections are necessarily the cause of consciousness of the conatus, which is the mind and idea and thought. It's not a term he uses very often, which is kind of interesting to see him bring back.
I think we need to be. I think we're going too fast because I think the conatus. I think that is the point. I think that is the point. So I think we've got to understand how we get to that point because so Spinoza, just go back to the beginning, Spinoza sometimes, so we're in the realm of desire. So these are the kind of the passions of the body and passions of the mind, say. So sometimes defines desire as appetite together with consciousness of the appetite. So he's given this kind of, he's given us this little snapshot, shall we say, of how consciousness and desire, let's say bodily desire, but appetite, kind of work together. He says appetite together with, so appetite is just another word for desire. So appetite together with consciousness of the appetite. So again, this is how consciousness has worked up to now. But he says this is only a nominal definition of desire. So what he means by that, it's only a definition in name only. It's not actually a definition. And he said consciousness adds nothing to desire. And so again, this slightly, let's just leave that for a moment. But consciousness adds nothing adds nothing.
Consciousness
to appetite.
it adds nothing to appetite, which you could also say desire, by the way. Like consciousness adds nothing to this process or to this thing. Consciousness is sort of a perception.
I think the point of that, though, what I would say is that, so the model that Spinoza is working with is one of composition and decomposition. So when things always come together, but in one hand it could be to the good or it could be to the bad. But here, I think the point I'm just kind of, touching, I'm just putting this one out there a little bit. It seems that here consciousness does not do any of that. It adds nothing to the appetite.
Nope.
And then he gives this quote, and he says, "We neither strive for nor will, neither want nor desire anything because we judge it to be good."
Yep.
So judging is what the consciousness does. So we don't do it because the consciousness judges something to be good. Therefore, we will strive for it, want it, or desire. So these are all kind of aspects of desire or appetite, shall we say. He says, on contrary, we judge something to be good because we strive for it, will it, want it, and desire it. So this is the kind of how something can be judged to be good. This is what I think is being said, but this section I find quite kind of complex to kind of understand, to be honest.
Well, so I would rephrase this slightly. If we're talking about composition, decomposition, or to slightly change that, the construction of the good or the construction of the bad, kind of. The way it's being phrased here, you could say that all things are constantly being constructed. Consciousness is always being constructed. And so there's always this, because of composition, decomposition, if we're talking about it that way, anything that is being built that consciousness is seeing, it is judged after the fact to be good. So the consciousness is always being born out of the composition of things. And so as such, looking back at that process, consciousness goes, well, these must be the things I wanted because this is what I'm seeing. And it's like, it's just seeing the process. As he says, consciousness is the passage, the awareness of the passage from less potent to more potent, which is, and this is the term conatus, as Spinoza's using it throughout ethics, is very specifically this idea of sort of the central drive to continue, this drive to the effort to push forward. It's not really drive, although that kind of is how it's turned later by others. But it is kind of this inclination of things to continue to exist and enhance life. So if we're talking about composition, decomposition, it's composition is the path that's happening here. And so the question is, where does consciousness come in? Well, as things are composed, it's sort of it's this observer that's sort of seeing it, this watching these things happen and judging them, but not judging things and then sorting them. They're done. It's the good that's being built that we're able to see. We go, that's us, despite, all the things that are also happening that may not be in line with the conatus or this drive or this other thing become secondarily, because again, the consciousness is the collection of these things. As he says, the determinative affections are necessarily the cause of the consciousness of the conatus, this drive, this affect, this thing that's seeing and effort pushing forward all of this. He says the real definition of desire, one that at the same time shows the cause by which consciousness is hollowed out, as it were, in the appetitive process. The appetitive process, the creation of appetites, appetite being made, appetite being seen. And that's the thing that Spinoza is really driving at as he's pushing. He originally defines desire, appetite together with consciousness of it. The drive or the conatus is the thing that is the appetite together with consciousness of the appetite. And so, as Deleuze says, the appetite is nothing but the effort by which each thing strives to persevere in its being, each body in extension, each mind or idea and thought. This whole thing is the conatus. That's all how Spinoza is using that term and uses it throughout. It's not a thing a lot of people pick up elsewhere. It's a cool term. It's one of those concepts that, like, I don't know why it didn't get picked up. It's a good one. It mostly became drive, and everyone just uses drive now, which kind of strips it of so much. Sorry for the ramble. I'll get back to you, Derek. I didn't want to move on too far. I was just trying to sort of meet you and talk about the language you're using, because it is a difficult paragraph, and I want to make sure I'm grasping it too.
Yeah, because I think like I say, in this section, so basically, Deleuze is accused of materialism because he kind of basically prioritizes the body, but the body is only in parallel to the mind. And what's being done in a sense is getting rid of consciousness, the power of consciousness to control both the mind and the body. And I think this is where the kind of notion of desires comes in, this notion of passions and things like that. And so this notion of the conatus or conatus.
I don't know. I don't know that.
Yeah.
That part I fucking don't know at all.
No. I kind of I tried to find out, because it's quite difficult to find kind of definition of these things, but what I did find. So I think it's what you were saying earlier, actually, Brooks, about he said, so Spinoza's conatus doctrine states each thing to the extent it is in itself strives, and it is a notion of striving. The conatus is striving, and if we go to that quote earlier, so he says, right. So go back to the beginning of this. Sorry, go back to the beginning of this paragraph. So the point is here is, what is the cause of the consciousness? That's the point of this paragraph. Each thing must have a cause. Up to now, all the consciousness knows are effects. So that's all our consciousness knows.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes into desire, and it seems like a strange kind of what suddenly we're in the realm of desire. But again, it's to do with the kind of bodily passions, and again, because they're parallel, that will also relate to the mind. So this notion of parallelism is crucial to understanding this kind of line of thinking, where that's going to. And he says sometimes that defines desire as appetite together with consciousness of the appetite. And he says this is purely a nominal definition. And it's actually, fundamentally it doesn't work, because in that is the consciousness of the appetite. And he says, and then he gives this quote, which so fundamentally, we judge something to be good, it's just going to the end of the quote, because we strive for it. And again, this is this kind of notion of the connotators: will it, want it, and desire it. And then, as we've said, we then need to arrive at a real definition of desire, one that shows the cause. So this is what we're trying to get at: the cause, and the cause by which, and the key point phrase here, it seems to me, is by which consciousness is hollowed out. So as hollowed out, as it were, in the appetitive process. Now, again, I think, what does this mean? Because fundamentally, he wants to kind of decline. He wants to get rid of, not, we still have consciousness, obviously, but he wants to kind of devalue it. That's the actual word he uses at the beginning of this. It's a devaluation, and I think this is the hollowing out of it. I feel it hollowing out in the appetitive process, and then he can go into. So this is the point of this paragraph. And then he goes into what the appetite is. Now, the appetite is nothing else but the effort by which each thing strives to persevere in its being. And that's exactly the definition of the conatus. Each thing, I'm going to go back to my kind of definition I found somewhere. I can't remember where I found it, to be honest. Each thing, to the extent it is in itself, strives to persevere in its being. Now, and I'll go back to the...
That's from Ethics.
Yeah, all right, okay. So now the appetite is nothing else but the effort by which each thing strives to persevere in its being. So this is the striving is to persevere in its being, and then each body, and then from that we get the being, and then from that the body. The body is in extension. So the body is the word extension kind of relates to the kind of spatial organization of the body, and each mind or each idea in thought, and the mind is in. Each idea are in thought. So we've got this appetite, and it's through its cause. This is the cause by which consciousness is devalued, I would say.
Interesting. Okay.
And well, then he goes this effort, and I think the effort is the effort of I think it means striving. I think that is the effort.
Striving is generally how a lot of people have translated conatus. It's one of the reasons that the words didn't really make it through, is people just started, because it's Latin. It means to endeavor, the process of endeavoring, some shit like that. So people just started translating it instead of just leaving the word alone, because it's a good concept. So it's often been translated as effort, the drive, things like that. Impulse. I think also, like, it plays back in this old Latin idea of like the drive to do a thing is the conatus. That's old Latin shit.
Yeah. So, and then I think that sets up the rest of the paragraph. He says this effort prompts us to act differently according to the objects encountered. We should say that it is at every moment determined by the affections that come from the objects. So it's what we kind of, so I think, again, I mean, not fantastically clear, but try and make sort of sense of this. So that this effort prompts us to act differently. So there's a notion of action. So the acts of the body, acts of the mind. I mean, in the kind of consciousness, the idea of the consciousness, it's the consciousness that makes us act. But here we have acts of bodies and acts of mind, which are in parallel with each other. So it's acts, but anyway, coming back to this section, because this effort prompts us to act differently according to the objects encountered, we should say that it is at every moment determined by the affections that come from the objects. And he said, just to continue from that, these determinative affections are necessarily the cause of the consciousness of the conatus, and that's exactly what we're trying to find. So, what is the cause of the consciousness? So, the consciousness of the, and what it's a consciousness of is striving. So it's not consciousness as something that is the kind of the primary thing that kind of moves our body and our mind. It's actually consciousness of the conatus, so this striving. So we have a kind of a consciousness of this striving, this will, or whatever you want to call it, this appetitive process, which come from the objects. I mean, the objects can be things, other bodies, but they can also be ideas that in the mind. Remember, these are parallel. It's not like one instead of the other. They're both in parallel to each other. So what happens in one is we can find in parallel to the other.
Yeah, to quote, because it's the consciousness of it. I think I want to be very, because that's we'll get into a little bit more of that, but it's for sure this is where he's beginning to do the devaluing in the original ethics. Spinoza says, although the thing and its conatus are distinguished by reason or by words, and this is the main cause of the error, the two are in no way distinct from one another in reality. So he's very much, he's not really trying to build a, hey, I'm adding in 6 new layers to what reality is, but instead really getting at this idea of what consciousness is, and consciousness being this awareness of the drive and ultimately being part of that same process.
So we have these in fact, again, we need to think what does he mean by affections? By the affections that come from the objects. And again, it's I think perhaps a good way to think about those are the feelings that come from that. I think that's tends to be the general way we understand the term affection. It's the feelings we get from these. And remember, we're in the realm of the appetite, of the desires. So therefore, it does make sense that it's determinative affections, or affections, I should say. And that he says the determinative affections are necessarily the cause of the consciousness of the conatus. And he says, since the affections are not separable from a movement by which they cause us to go to greater or lesser perfection, joy and sadness, depending on whether the thing encountered enters into competition with it, on the contrary, tends to decompose us, consciousness appears as the continual awareness of this passage from greater to lesser, or from lesser to greater, as a witness of the variation and determination of the conatus functioning in relation to other bodies or other ideas. And I think that probably the crucial very long sentence. So he says, so we've got this notion of movement, and which is the kind of the composition or decomposition. In relation to bodies, it's how when one body enters into ours, we can enter it as a composition. It kind of increases our bodily power, or it can decompose, and it decreases it. And exactly the same must be for the mind. And he said that's in relation to mind, ideas in the mind. So he says, since the affection, so again, feelings are not separable from a movement by which they cause us to go to greater or lesser perfection. So this greater or lesser perfection is joy and sadness. So obviously joy is a greater perfection. Sadness is the lesser perfection. Depending on whether the thing encountered, and again, it goes into this composition, the thing encountered, this object we encounter, so the passage,
the bodies collide, ours and something else, and it either enters into composition with us or tends to decompose us. And these things we then see, because we're experiencing sort of the transition of these elements, this awareness of the passage from that we perceive almost ourselves to be taking from greater to lesser or lesser to greater. I am made lesser, I am made greater. I am in line with the drives. I'm oh God, why am I so self-destructive kind of mentality. And this is the joy or sadness, the greater or lesser perfection that's constantly being made.
Yeah, and this is the cause of consciousness. So this kind of this striving, this the kind of the affections, that objects we have from affections, that the kind of composition and decomposition of when bodies or ideas meet in the mind. The consciousness is, as he says, is the witness to it. It plays no part in it. And that takes us back to the beginning of this paragraph when he says fundamentally the appetite, without quote appetite together with consciousness of the appetite, that's the definition of consciousness. desire, and the role of consciousness in that. He said this as a nominal definition because consciousness plays no part, but it's purely there as a witness. As a witness of the variations and determinations of the conatus functioning in relation to other bodies or other ideas. So this striving functions in relation to other bodies or other ideas. He said the object then agrees with that agrees with my nature, determines to form a superior totality. So again, this is this notion of the composition in terms of good and bad, although I don't think he talks about it in this section because this is not the point. Point of this section
Is
is the
consciousness.
devaluation of consciousness.
Yeah.
That is in the next section. So the object agrees with my nature, determines me to form a superior totality, i.e. Joy. That includes us, the objects, and myself. The object does not agree with me, jeopardizes my cohesion, and tends to divide me into subsets. I mean, this is kind of sadness, but at its extreme is death. In the extreme case, enters into relation that are incompatible with my constitutive relation. So we're constituted by the relations of parts. This is the other element that we haven't really spoken about. And everything is in parts. This is the kind of basic underlying thought here. And so it's these parts that kind of come together, and when they kind of be composed or decomposed, and it's decomposed in the extreme form of that is death. So it's joy in one hand, sadness in the other. The extreme form of sadness is death. So then he gives us a kind of idea what he means by consciousness. Again, from this consciousness is the passage, or rather the awareness of the passage from less. So again, this notion of a passage or a transition, the awareness of the passage from these less potent totalities to more potent ones, and vice versa. So we go from we go more joyful and less joyful. From joyful to from where we are to a more joyful state, or go the other way around, from where we are to a sadder state. He said it's purely transitive, but it's not a property of the whole, of any specific whole. Again, this notion of whole and parts, or a specific whole. So
Well,
a
it's
whole made up of parts.
the line here that's I think really important to this part is consciousness is the passage, or the awareness of the passage from these less potent totalities to more potent ones, and vice versa. And again, from here, it's worth noting that he's not saying good or bad. He's using the term potent. There's a powerful, the potency, the power of the thing. This is a Spinoza, when he's talking about the conatus, he talks about sort of versions of it, which, I mean, it's really interesting to read the Ethics, because he talks about, and you might hear some words you recognize. It's when it's of the mind, the conatus, we call it will. When it's body, it's appetite. Like the way that these things sort of come to be, it's the passage of appetites from blank to blank, potent to less potent. We experience, oh, my appetite is growing, like I'm getting hungry. Oh, look, I'm not hungry anymore. Is this sort of thing, I'm getting less hungry, or I'm less thirsty. Like we experience the passage of potency almost. It's almost like saying consciousness is about experiencing the delta between appetites, you could say.
Yeah, I think the point though with conatus is the thing that is this potency, and fundamentally, I would say
it's awareness of the potency.
I would say the conatus is the power, and it's something that strives, and it strives. What does it strive? It strives to preserve it in its being. It's basically a striving to preserve oneself. To kind of make sure that you maintain this wholeness, and it can go beyond that. It can go. Obviously, it can kind of elevate, but if we meet something that does the opposite, it can depress. And I would say that the kind of basic idea here is this notion of potency is a power, because I think that the transition is from less power to more powerful, or on the other hand, from powerful to less. We use the word potency, and I think that there is this. I think that particularly in relation to Nietzsche, I think that idea completely fits in with Nietzsche, because he himself was very concerned with this whole notions of power relationships, and different levels of power and how they kind of work together. And I think this is why I think Deleuze and really connects Spinoza and Nietzsche together, I would say. And this is why I think he ends with this quote from Nietzsche. So he calls it transitive. I mean, I think for me, the word transitive means it goes from one level to another level. It's a transition. It goes from a power to a higher power, or from a power to a lower power. So these are energetics, basically. These are levels of energy or power or potency. And I think something that
So
definitely Nietzsche.
a little bit of an edge there, and maybe it's just wording. To the example that Spinoza uses in ethics is, I'll just read it out. If I say motion has force to persevere in its own state, for if I say that this body A, there is nothing else than a certain quantity of motion, from this it clearly follows that as long as I am attending to the body A, I must always say the body is moving. For if I were to say that it is losing its force of motion, I am necessarily ascribing to it something else beyond what we supposed in the hypothesis, something causing it to lose its nature. Now, if this reasoning seems obscure, let us grant this conatus to motion is something other than the very laws and nature of motion. Because then you suppose this conatus to be a metaphysical good. This conatus will also necessarily have a conatus to persevere, and then another and another. I can't imagine a more absurd thesis. Now, the reason why they make this distinction between the conatus of a thing and the thing itself is that they feel in themselves a wanting to preserve themselves, and they imagine a similar wanting in each individual being. It's very, very much separating out the conatus as being the will versus the actual movement. He's very clear on that in the ethics, and that's how I read it here with Deleuze too. That there's the movement of the thing is like we're seeing the effect. It's the ball is rolling, and I go, oh look, the ball's rolling. Oh, it's losing. It's rolling, losing its speed. It's losing its force of motion. I'm ascribing something else to it because I'm ascribing an it. I'm ascribing a losing. I'm ascribing it should keep going. The presumption, all of this, and this reasoning puts us in a place where we're talking about a thing beyond the element, where we're talking about the perception, the watching, the awareness of these things, the passage of them. Which itself, he'll get into like how it operates and stuff, but the question is ultimately, and this is the reason I think he pulls in Nietzsche here, is there's a lot more happening than just the one track I'm seeing. Now, consciousness is the one track. It is me seeing and taking in the appetites that are part of what I understand to be good. It's the, as he says here and talks about it, it's joy and sadness. These things have greater or lesser perfection depending on the thing encounters into composition with us. But it's not one thing is ever in composition with us or entering into composition or decomposition. There's many things sort of happening, and consciousness is the separation out and the line going, well, here's the through line through this. This is consciousness appears as a continual awareness of this passage from greater to lesser or lesser to greater, a witness of the variations and determinations of the conatus functioning in relation to other bodies and other ideas. There's a lot happening, but that's consciousness. This itself wouldn't devalue consciousness. The thing that's devaluing consciousness is that there is this greater activity. Consciousness appears, to quote Nietzsche, when a whole wants to subordinate itself to a superior whole. It is primarily the consciousness of the superior whole, the reality external to the ego. Consciousness is born in relation to a being of which we can function, the means we incorporate into that being. It is the sort of play that he's making here at large. Again, the stamping out of the anguish of all of the effects that we're seeing and being able to call them causes and being able to have that through line. So it's slightly different. Sorry, go ahead.
I would be quick to say that the ultimate cause is desire, and consciousness can be aware of desire, but consciousness, it cannot be assumed cannot assume that the consciousness is a cause of its own desire.
Yep. And again, I think for here, I'm going to avoid using desire because that's where, like he talks about it a little bit, but very much we're talking about the conatus, the appetites, the drives, the will, which is the terms Spinoza's using.
Yeah, I think the conatus is the, as he says, is the it's striving to persevere in its being. So that I think that is, it wants to persevere. It wants to kind of it doesn't want to die. Basically, I would say perhaps.
But that's not. But that's it, like yes, but it is the striving itself. So if we attach sort of both sides to that, the traditional way that Spinoza's critiquing of talking about consciousness is the idea that there is like a human soul or a consciousness that's taking in information, wants to survive, and doing things to elicit that survival. Sort of this very nice sort of movement. What his critique is that actually what's happening is there's this huge wall of shit that's happening, just flying at us, and the conatus takes certain it has a is a psychological element that's seeing a very specific line of things, that's playing with very, very particular elements. And this is where the conatus is, that's consciousness that ignores the entirety of the unconscious. And the unconscious is the greater activity that's happening. The conatus is my the drive to existence that is driving itself or believes itself to exist. And so by seeing the effects of things, the conatus creates its own sort of quasi-cause. It's the awareness of the passage.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. But never mind. I think what we're looking for, I think we're getting a bit sidetracked because I think what we're looking for is the cause of the consciousness. And so we've got this model here. So the body is the model, as he said at the beginning, right at the beginning of this section. And so he wants to go down. Basically, he kind of brings in the mind as well, but and ideas, and but he says it's fundamental. I think the basic examples here are kind of to do with desires, and I would say bodily desires, but obviously kind of the same thing because of parallelism. The same thing relate to ideas, and so and I think the point is the absolute point. I think we've said this already actually, and the point is the consciousness is the cause of the consciousness is that it's a witness to this kind of this relationship between bodies and ideas, the kind of in which they compose and decompose each other, and in which is this notion of the conatus, the thing that drives as a striving, the thing that strives. So the appetites are the appetitive process is one of striving for something, but the point of the consciousness is that it is just an awareness of this passage. As it says passage, because the conatus is, going back to that, is transitive. It is something. I'll kind of stick with that because it is fundamentally a kind of it's like a power. It goes from one level to another, has that kind of striving, that element attached to it, I would say. But the point of this section is the devaluation of the. He devalues the consciousness by saying it only knows effects, it doesn't know causes. It's an illusion. It's a site of an illusion, etc. So we know all that.
Mm-hmm.
But the final paragraph says, well, we still need to have a cause. We have consciousness. So what is the cause of that? And he says the cause of that is that it's a bystander in the kind of bodies and the unconscious and the bodies in the way in which their parts kind of interact with other bodies, other ideas, and it's a kind of and it's driven by this striving process, process of striving. And that brings us to that final quote when he says the greater activity is unconscious. So consciousness usually only appears when a whole wants to subordinate itself to a superior whole. It is primary, and again, this notion
But
of
then couldn't
superior.
we say, just to take the beginning of that quote, because the conatus is the consciousness of the process, it is the lesser activity.
No, it's not the consciousness. No, it can't be. No, sorry, it just
It
can't be the
is.
conscious.
It's the
Sorry, the way I read it, we are conscious of the conatus. That we have consciousness of the conatus. The conatus is not a conscious process; it's an unconscious one. I think that's the whole point of this final quote. The greater activity is unconscious. Consciousness usually only appears when a whole wants to subordinate itself to a superior whole. It's primarily the consciousness of this superior whole of reality. So it's a consciousness of this consciousness of the superior whole of reality external to the ego. There's something exterior, but what is, as you said, the greater activity is the unconscious, and I think that's the whole point. Because if we don't have that, then the whole thing doesn't make sense. Because what he said fundamentally, so the body is the model, and he says, what is it about the body? He says we don't know what it's capable of, so we have lack of knowledge in relation to the body, and similarly we lack. I can't find it now, but we lack. There's a lack in relation to thought. Well, it's the unconscious of thought. He says the unconscious thought, which is just as profound as the unknown of the body. So they both have these things. They're both kind of, you could say somehow lacking, but they're not really. But let's say they are. And I think the point is, so this is the root. If we want to kind of say the conatus is somehow consciousness, then we're just going back to what Spinoza and Deleuze want to overturn, which is that we are driven by consciousness. It wants to devalue this. It wants to give he said what we are conscious of is the conatus, this striving, but we don't understand it. We just don't get it. I think that's the point. Anyway, that's what I think.
So for me, the conatus comes into existence because the conatus is ultimately the strive to existence once a thing has begun to exist. It again, this is why I use the term quasitas or talk about it in this way. Consciousness needs to have a cause. The cause is the thing that brings about consciousness, and the conatus is the inherent sort of drive that a thing has towards sort of its own existence, towards the sort of movement. And so in this case, as he's talking about it, the determinate affections, and determinate being the sort of big deal here, this effort prompts us to act differently according to objects encountered. We should say that it is at every moment determined by the affections that come from the objects. These determinative affections are necessarily the cause of the consciousness of the conatus. Now, there's two ways to take the sentence, and I think this is where we're splitting up. It's consciousness of, like being conscious of the conatus. I'm seeing the drive, or I'm seeing things, I'm seeing that. Or is it consciousness of the conatus? Like quite literally the sentence as it's sort of structured. The affections are not separable from movement, by which they cause us to greater or lesser perfection, depending on whether blah, 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 blah. But consciousness appears as a continual awareness of this passage from greater to lesser, or lesser to greater, a witness of the variations and determinations of the conatus functioning in relation to other bodies and ideas. The element, the body or the mind or whatever we've decided has come into existence that is seeing this, the consciousness of its own process is going to necessarily be towards its own drive. This is the sort of way he's talking about it. Things that don't have this existence don't have a conatus. Like a conatus is a mode's essence once the mode has begun to exist. The conatus is, just to read another quote, the conatus is not in Spinoza the effort to persevere in existence once existence is granted. It designates existential functions of existence, the affirmation of essence in a mode's existence. There's a very different play here that he's making, but we can get through. That's fine. It's just the way I have a very different take on this, but it's a complex thing. Can we, to sum up so we can keep going, there is a devaluation of the idea that had existed prior to this of the consciousness, the idea that that is all there was, that what I'm aware of or what I know is what I am the things I think, I make choices, I make decisions, and instead there's a lot more happening here. And as such, we need to be sort of more aware of the entirety of the unconscious, or everything that the mind is doing or is part of, and same with the body. Is that a fair way to put it, Derek?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. I would love to have a discussion on the other bit too, because I think it's really, I mean, it's central to it, but it's a fun back and forth. But we should continue, because I know we'll bore the shit out of everyone if we force them to keep listening to us. Anyone have any notes or comments before I move on to the second part, where we devalue all values? The devaluation of valuing, I guess. That's probably a silly way to put it, but yeah. I'm glad it's not boring. See, there we go. Derek, we're not boring. I'm wrong. There you go. It is worth, just as I mentioned, I know we try not to go outside of text. The other Spinoza text that is a bear to get through, it is a lot. There's a chapter called What a Body Can Do that's worth reading. The entire thing is worth reading, but this is specifically around the conatus and how Deleuze is taking it from Spinoza per Leibniz and a whole bunch of other shit that I'm having to reread because I just reread Monadology, and that's a whole fucking other thing. It's a whole fucking other thing, to say the least. Yeah. Excellent. Well, let's get to devaluing values. 2. A devaluation of all values, and of good and evil in particular, in favor of good and bad. Spinoza, the immoralist. I like the term immoralist. I wonder what it is in the original French. It's a cool word. Thou shalt not eat of the fruit. The anxious, ignorant Adam understands these words as the expression of a prohibition, and yet what do they refer to? To a fruit that as such will poison Adam if he eats it. This is an instance of an encounter between two bodies whose characteristic relations are not compatible. The fruit will act as a poison, that is, it will determine the part of Adam's body, and paralleling this, the idea of the fruit will determine parts of his mind, to enter into new relations that no longer accord with his own essence. But because Adam is ignorant of causes, he thinks that God morally forbids him something, whereas God only reveals the natural consequences of ingesting the fruit. Spinoza is categorical on this point. All the phenomena that we group under the heading of evil, illness, and death are of this type. Bad encounters, poisoning, intoxication, relational decomposition. This is a theological, political treatise, the Tractus Theologus Politicus, I prefer saying, because it sounds cooler and it makes it seem like I understand Latin. We can spend a moment going through this. If you don't know the story of Adam and Eve, in the Old Testament, there's Adam. He's hanging out in the Garden of Eden, and God goes, "There's this tree. Don't eat that fruit." And Adam presumes that this is a moral edict, like just a law done for fun, like don't walk on the grass, shit like that. There's no secondary reason, but it's because this fruit will poison him. Now, you can talk about all the different ways of that, but for Spinoza, he very much wants to talk about it, not that this fruit is going to give him all the knowledge and therefore a good thing, because that's not really Spinoza's thing he's interested in. He doesn't want to talk about like this grand narrative and ultimately it ended up better and utilitarian things. No. The fruit changes him, fundamentally poisons his being. Adam, a naive babe in the woods, doesn't understand good and evil, doesn't understand the difference. The fruit is going to give him this knowledge. It'll poison him, his body, his mind, and he will enter into new relations that no longer accord with his own essence. Adam, being ignorant of this, only finds out after the fact, and God only reveals the natural consequence of ingesting the fruit. Spinoza wants to really drive this all together. With the PDF cut back, God damn it. Why did it do that? Wait. Am I still talking? What the fuck?
Yeah, I can hear you.
What the fuck, Discord? Discord stopped doing everything. What the fuck? Just
Yeah,
the
it's
worst.
really, it didn't cut off for me at all, bro.
Okay. Well, Discord is what the fuck? Fuck you, Discord. There, it should be back there. The stream should be back. But anyway, the underlying thing Spinoza wants to talk about is, again, as we talked about a little bit, and we don't have to get into the entire thing, but he used the phrasing of bodies and minds, the pieces coming together. The specific phrasing are they cause us to greater affections are not separable from movement which they cause. Whether a thing enters into composition with us, or on the contrary, tends to decompose us. The passage or awareness of the passage from less potent totalities to more. He wants to have us think of these things not as this grand, oh, this is evil, I fucking hate this. This shit's evil, evil, evil. Why would you ever, blah, blah, blah. But instead, actually take a moment and instead consider these things as Deleuze says here. It should instead be bad encounters, a poisoning, an intoxication, relational decomposition, stepping sort of away from these things.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, the point is that, so he says, he describes Adam as anxious, ignorant, and this is the state that we're in. Because going back, he says we are anxious. We have only inadequate ideas, inadequate understandings of things. He says, just to quote, in short, the conditions under which we know things and are conscious of ourselves condemn us to have only inadequate ideas that are confused and mutilated. And this results from the effect separate from their real causes. So I think the point of this paragraph is that it's to contrast the moral law with the ethical choice, shall we say? So it's call it, I don't know what to call it, the commandment, whatever you want to call that first opening, thou shalt not eat of the fruit.
It's not a commandment.
We could read that as a kind of,
yeah.
We could read it as a moral. So you must not, and it's a kind of thing that it's driving you. You must obey this. Is the kind of a idea of you must obey this without question. It's not open to kind of debate or question at all. It's just there. It's a moral.
Well, it's sort of
morality.
So it's the line, and it's Spinoza's really specific about this, and the way the Bible talks about it is in line with this. It's he thinks God morally forbids him something. The line is always, if you eat of this tree, you must not eat from this tree, the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will die. The only thing Adam's aware of is the consequence. Like this, we'll get really quickly to this. It's, I think, really fast here, but it's the consequence is the only thing. This is it. It's not really understanding the whys or how the process is going to do it or what that means. It's instead the consequence. You eat this, it's going to fucking kill you. Don't do it. And Adam is like, why would you make something that would kill us? That's stupid. Because he doesn't think about like causes. It's only effects.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think the point is between moral and ethical. He says, because Adam is ignorant of causes, he thinks God morally forbids him something, whereas God only reveals the natural. So we've got this notion of the natural consequence of ingesting the fruit. And I think this is the point, this thing, we take it into our body and its effect on our body. And he says, Spinoza is categorical on this point. All the phenomena that we group under the heading of evil, illness, and death are of this type. They're bad encounters, poison, intoxication, relational decomposition. So it's just exactly what he's been talking about. And he says, so again, the kind of Adam and the apple is, in Spinoza, is an instance of an encounter between two bodies. So the body of body of Adam and the body of the fruit. And he says, whose characteristic relations are not compatible. And he says the fruit will act as a poison, that is, will determine the parts of Adam's body. So again, the notion of the whole is made up of parts. But it also is not, and because of the rule of parallelism, and parallel is the idea the fruit will determine the parts of his mind. So they will enter into new relations that no longer, so they're not according to his essence as what Adam is as this being. And I think that so the point, like I say, I feel the point is that we take this as a moral imperative, when in fact it's a kind of ethical choice, and it's to do with taking this in. This is what will result, this decomposition of the body.
Should we continue?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. In any case, there are always relations that enter into composition in their particular order according to the eternal laws of nature. There is no good or evil, but there is good and bad. Beyond good and evil, at least, this does not mean. Beyond good and bad. That's Nietzsche. The good is when a body directly compounds its relation with ours, and with all or part of its power increases ours, a food, for example. For us, the bad is when a body decomposes our body's relation, although it still combines with our parts, but in ways that do not correspond to our essence, as when a poison breaks down the blood. Hence, good and bad have a primary objective meaning, but one that is relative and partial, that which agrees with our nature or does not agree with it, which is subjective and modal, qualifying two types, two modes of man's existence. That individual will be called good, or free, or rational, or strong, who strives, insofar as he is capable, to organize his encounters, to join with whatever agrees with his nature, to combine his relation with relations that are compatible with his, and thereby to increase his power. For goodness is a matter of dynamism, power, and the composition of powers. Sorry, 2 seconds. I have a shitty PDF. And if anyone has a good PDF, please let me know. For goodness is a matter of dynamism, power, and the composition of powers. That individual will be called bad, or servile, or weak, or foolish, who lives haphazardly, who is content to undergo the effects of his encounters, but wails and accuses every time the effect undergone does not agree with him, and reveals his own impotence. For by lending oneself in this way to whatever encounter and whatever circumstance, believing that with a lot of violence or a little guile one will always extricate oneself, how can one fail to have more bad encounters than good? How can one keep from destroying oneself through guilt and others through resentment, spreading one's own powerlessness and enslavement everywhere, one's own sickness, indigestions, and poisons? In the end, one is unable even to encounter oneself. This is again, a lot of ethics, a lot of Spinoza in here. We're going to have a lot of discussion, I have a feeling, around this, because it's continuing a lot of the previous.
Yeah, I think it's quite, I don't know, it seems quite clear, though, I think, in the way it's set out.
Well, you say that, but you haven't let me talk and prove that I have no idea what's happening. See, there we go.
Okay, give me a go at it. In any case, he says there are relations that enter into composition in their particular order, according to Ernst. So we've got this kind of, in the previous paragraph, we're saying we kind of mistake this God's directive to not eat the fruit as one of a morality that, it's a demand that you must obey regardless, without even understanding it, just obey it. Whereas, in fact, it's just saying that, if you take this in, it will have a bad effect on your body. And so it's a poison. It's kind of warning. It's saying that one of poison. It's poisonous. He says in any case, there are always relations that enter into composition in their particular order according to the eternal laws of nature. So he said there are always relations. So these relations, excuse me. The body is made up of parts, so it has relations interior to itself. But then it can obviously kind of meet with other bodies, which themselves are made of relations, parts, which and then enter into a composition according to the eternal laws of nature. So these kind of compositions, decompositions, are not moral. They're according to they're laws of nature fundamentally. So they're not laws of God. They're laws of nature. And he said there is no good or evil, but there is good and bad. So God's the moral directive is good and evil, whereas the kind of laws of nature are directives of good and bad. And then, quote, beyond good and evil, at least this does not mean beyond good and bad. So we must preserve the good and bad. The good is when a body, and again, then he gives us what he now tells us in detail what the good is, and what the bad is, and the kind of the extension of this, how it kind of goes towards the individual themselves. So the God is when a body directly good is when a body directly compounds its relation with ours, and with all our parts of its power increases ours. So a food, this is good. A food, the relation of our body to another body, the body of food, which compounds its relation with ours. So it kind of enters into a kind of composition with ours, and also with its all parts of its power. So those are what's also combined, and they increase ours. And he gives says food, for example. For us, the bad is when a body decomposes our relations, although it still combines. So it still combines, but it has this decomposition. It breaks, but in ways that do not correspond to our essence. So it kind of destroys our very being, I would say. So as when a poison breaks down the blood, hence good and bad have a primary objective meaning, but one that is relative. So it's made up of relations, it's relational, and partial. It's made up of parts. So each body is partial. It's made up of parts, and it's relative to the other body. And that which agrees with our nature or does not agree with it. So that's it in the end. But then this is a secondary meaning. So consequently, good and bad have a secondary meaning, which is subjective and modal. So it's a kind of relation to the subject, and it's a kind of as a modal. And he says two types or two modes of man's existence. So these are two types of existence that we can enter into, and we have the good and the bad. So the good individual is the one who we can also call free, rational, strong, who strives, insofar as he's capable, to organise his encounters, to join with whatever agrees with his nature, to combine his relation with relations that are compatible with his. So doesn't drink, nice food, etc., and thereby to increase his power. He says for goodness goodness, the kind of essence of to be good, is a matter of dynamism, power, and the composition of power. So this is the kind of Roshan, and I think this is what I was kind of referring to about the consciousness, is this kind of power relationship. It's a matter of dynamism, power, and the composition of powers. And then we go into the individual who's bad, will be called bad or servile or weak or foolish, who lives haphazardly, who is content to undergo the effects of his encounter. So it doesn't, it's just the effects, he's interested in the effect, not the cause. So the kind of effect of drinking is, to be drunk, So he just knows that the effects of his encounters, or perhaps it is to speak ill-advisedly to other people. Anyway, so the individual we call bad or servile or weak or foolish, who lives haphazardly, who is content to undergo the effects of his encounters, but wails and accuses every time the effect undergone does not agree with him, and reveals his own impotence, i.e. lack of power. So the good is increasing power, the bad is the decreasing power. For by lending oneself in this way to whatever encounter, in whatever circumstance, leaving that with a lot of violence or a little guile. So just to go along with it, and then gives the idea that you'll be able to get out of what results with some violence or a little guile. One will always extricate himself. So how can one fail to have more bad encounters than good? How can one keep from destroying oneself through guilt? So this is the notion of the kind of guilt and resentment. Again, these kind of terms. Bad conscience, I think that's the term, I can't remember. I think that's the term that Nietzsche uses, but it's guilt and then resentment towards others. So we have guilt of ourselves, we feel guilty about our poor behavior, but we resent others as well. Spreading one's own, so we are powerless, and we have this kind of notion of we're enslaved. Enslavement everywhere, one's own sickness, indigestion, and poison. So how can one keep from destroying oneself through guilt and others through resentment, so we spread one's own powerlessness and enslavement everywhere, one's own sickness, indigestion. I mean, this obviously kind of might relate to the kind of notion of tyrant as well. In the end, one is unable even to encounter oneself. I mean, I don't know. I think that means that in one's very being, we kind of go away from.
Yeah, we kill ourselves. Or we Minecraft ourselves, whatever YouTube's fucking. Yeah. It's a piece on suicide and ethics. That's where he's getting that last bit from. That one is unable to encounter oneself. I think specifically the Tractus. Specifically ethics has this one part where he talks about that. I need to find it probably. But yeah. Part 4. Let's see. Because I want to actually get to that because I think it's an interesting ending to it. But mostly, to sort of make simple so we can keep moving, it's trying to move around this idea of, to move beyond good and evil. That's why he's got the Nietzsche line up there. But it's not doing away with the idea of good and bad. It's instead sort of reconfiguring things. It's moving beyond good and evil, but not good and bad. And it's this modality that he's talking about. It's this subjective and modal two modes of man's existence. An individual called good, an individual called bad, or things called good or bad as such. It's him building, because we're about to get into sort of more of that and how these things sort of come together. So, yeah. There you go. Any comments, any quotes, anything for people? Leaving it open awkwardly for a moment, just on the off chance someone decides that they have a thing to write. And I'm going to switch PDFs next week. Thank you for sharing that one. If you ever notice my PDF is shitty, please let me know and replace it. I'm very open to replacing shitty PDFs. Cool. Let's see. I want to get to the text on suicide. Oh, here it is. Good. We're in 20, the scholium. I'm just going to read it because it's a paragraph. Therefore, nobody, unless he is overcome by external causes, contrary to his own nature, neglects to seek his own advantage, that is, to preserve his own being. Nobody, I repeat, refuses food or kills himself from the necessity of his own nature, but from the constraint of external causes. This can take place in many ways. A man kills himself when he is compelled by another who twists his hand, in which he happens to hold a sword and makes him turn the blade against his heart. Or when, in obedience to a tyrant's command, he, like Seneca, is compelled to open his veins, that is, he chooses a lesser evil to avoid a greater. Or it may come about when unobservable external causes conditions a man's imagination and affect his body in such a way that the latter assumes a different nature, contrary to the previously existing one, a nature whereof there can be no idea in mind, but that a man, from the necessity of his own nature, should endeavor to cease to exist or to be changed into other form, is as impossible as that something should come from nothing, as anyone can see with a little thought. It's a great little line. I like Spinoza. All right.
So would the idea of good and evil be something like a judgment of a consciousness? And that's exactly what he's arguing against, right? This kind of, taking consciousness to be something that can make judgments and determine, what is good and evil and so forth. But what is good and bad is more consistent with the idea of acting according to what's good for the body, right? Which is something not
it's
involving consciousness.
In the next little bit here, Deleuze is going to, explicitly say, I think in the next few sentences, he's going to flat out come and say morality is this transcendent category, this thing. Otherwise, really what we're talking about is something much more immanent, something much more about the bodies and how they're coming together and much more direct. Excellent. To continue. In this way, ethics, which is to say a typology of eminent modes of existence, replaces morality, which always refers existence to transcendent values. Morality is the judgment of God, the system of judgment. But ethics overthrows the system of judgment. The opposition of values, good, evil, is supplanted by the qualitative difference of modes of existence, good or bad. The illusion of values is indistinguishable from the illusion of consciousness because it is consciousness. Sorry. Apologies. Because it is content to wait for and take in effects, consciousness misapprehends all of nature. Now, all that one needs in order to moralize is to fail to understand. It is clear that we have only to misunderstand a law for it to appear to us in the form of a moral "you must." If we do not understand the rule of three, we will apply it. We will adhere to it as a duty. Adam does not understand the rule of the relation of his body with the fruit, so he interprets God's word as a prohibition. Moreover, the confused form of moral law has so compromised the law of nature that the philosopher must not speak of natural laws, but only of eternal truths. Quote, the application of the word law to natural things seems to be metaphorical, and the ordinary meaning of law is simply a command. As Nietzsche says concerning chemistry, i.e., the science of antidotes and poison, one must be wary of the word law, which has a moral aftertaste. That's lovely. There's a lot said in here that I really like going back through because it's again bringing together the previous couple paragraphs into one. We're about to finish this second rule, but this is the Spinoza, the immoralist, which the immoralist sounds like a really good name for like a dark bar, or a shitty YouTuber, I guess, one of the two. We're replacing morality. This is again, it's what we were just talking about, JK. When we talk about ethics versus morality in this context and how Spinoza's talking about, we're getting away from things are good or evil, sort of a divine law, this idea, but instead moving to this idea of ethics, which are these qualitative elements of how bodies move together. It's supplanting the value of good and evil with the qualitative differences and modes of existence. This is again, Adam poisoned, Adam having his body changed by the fruit. Even if in the end there's like ultimately a good or some sort of way, there's a good and bad of interactions of bodies that we can take pretty good qualitative setup of. And the challenge is that consciousness misapprehends all of nature. This is where we kind of get fucked in the process, because consciousness is content to wait for and take in effects. It misapprehends nature. Again, it only sees the prohibition at the end rather than the causes of the things. It only hears the "you must" rather than understanding the sort of understanding the law, misunderstanding the law. I make a joke about this when we did this a couple of years ago. The way speed limits often work, there's reasons that there are speed limits. Now, they're a moral law. We can act like that, but that's not really the reason we have them, is because some places it's really fucking dangerous to go faster, and you don't do that. It'll go bad. It'll go bad. But we can say it's bad to break the law, which is a little bit different thing. We're talking about moving away from the sort of idea of the "you must" and instead realize that the rules of three, which we went back before, this was what sort of kicked this off, the three things: the illusion of final causes, illusion of free decrees, and the theological illusion. These things are part of this. They're making the consciousness. This is consciousness and the illusions that sort of constitute it and are part of it. And so all one needs to moralize is to fail to understand. It's clear we only have to misunderstand a law for it to appear to us as a "you must." We only have to misunderstand a traffic law in the same way. If we don't understand the rule of three, we'll apply it, adhere to it as duty. And this is where Spinoza's argument about Adam is, and this is what Deleuze's argument about Adam is here, where he's taking it, that he doesn't understand the rule of his relation of the body with the fruit. He doesn't understand how these bodies are seen, how consciousness is doing it. So he interprets these things as prohibition. This is how he sees it, and so he goes, well, I'm gonna fucking do it anyway. And it does. It turns out it does poison him and completely changes him and all that stuff. So there was actually kind of a reason, so don't do that thing. While we were talking, I realized I was going through when I said that in the original, he threatened in the Bible, hey, Adam, don't eat that or you'll die. That's been added. I went back and I was reading through while we were talking before about that's a thing we did in like the last 50 or 100 years. We added that. That shit's never been in the Bible until fucking the last century. So it turns out, yes, God never said why or the reason. It's just, don't do this thing. It's a rule. Because again, consciousness at the end of it. So for Spinoza, the story doesn't have that in there. I think it's pretty important for the context of this. And this is the Nietzsche thing at the end of it. Don't say law. It's his line, which I love. I think it's gay sciences. Is don't, when we talk about antidotes to poisons or anything, don't be wary of the word law because it has a moral aftertaste. I love that line. Such a fucking line. I love it. Is it the gay sciences?
It seems to go back to the idea that Spinoza is criticizing, that it's an idealization of consciousness, right? Where
Yes.
you idealize it to the point where, God is the supreme idealization of this kind of consciousness that judges, makes moral edicts and so forth. And it's not it's somehow doing it in spite of, or outside of the consciousness of nature itself, consciousness of the body.
Yeah, I think the point of this paragraph is that it kind of contrasts ethics with morality, and he says fundamentally at this point, ethics replaces morality. So, and he calls ethics a typology of immanent modes of existence. So these immanent modes of existence are what he's already said in the previous paragraph. These good and bad modes of existence. We kind of, and it is a kind of way of living essentially, according to how we live our lives, rather than taking on these kind of moral commands. He says, so ethics replaces morality, which always refers to existence, transcendent values. So these values which are beyond us, beyond the world, beyond ourselves, and their values. Their values in terms of they're fixed. They're good and evil. And he says morality is the judgment of God, the system of judgment, but ethics overthrows the system of judgment. And so the opposition of values, good, evil, is supplanted by the qualitative difference of modes. So they're different. These modes of existence, good or bad, are qualitatively different. So in terms of we can say strong, free, rational, etc., etc. So he continues this notion of, so we have an illusion. The illusion of values is distinguished from the illusion of consciousness. So equally, along with we're also conscious. There is an illusion of consciousness, which we went across we talked about previously, and then the illusion of values, which are distinguishable from those, because because both, he says, wait for and take in effects. Consciousness misapprehends all of nature. So both we misapprehend, we misunderstand nature through this kind of morality. So there, go back to the fruit. We understand it as there's this thing to not eat the fruit is a moral command transcendent from God, which cannot be countermanded. Now, all that one needs in order to moralize. So therefore, in order to moralize, so we can extend this out to people who moralize. So in order to moralize, we must fail to understand. So again, this failure to understand. It is clear that we've only to misunderstand the law for it to appear to us in the form of a moral you must. So a kind of misunderstanding, so that we have this misunderstanding of a law in order to understand it as a moral, as a morality, which means you must obey. And I think the rule of three actually is something different from I think Spinoza, I looked this up actually. So they're basically ways of living, how one should live one's life. I think these are rules. I might be wrong on this because I wasn't sure, but I kind of looked this up. So Spinoza's rule of three are kind of rules for living one's life. And I'll just read them out here. This I kind of, again, I've found them. I can't remember where I found these. One should have, these are the rules of three. I think this rule. So we could take what he's saying fundamentally. These are rules that then, but we could take them as laws. In other words, this is what you must do. So these rules, one should accommodate ordinary ways of speaking and living to the extent that one can, without compromising, to the extent that one can without compromising one's project. Two, one should enjoy pleasures in moderation. And finally, one should seek instrumental goods only insofar as they are necessary for health and social acceptability. And he says, so I think the point is that we could take that rule and think it as a moral law, and then it is our duty to do that. He says, Adam does not understand the rule of the relation of his body with the fruit, so he interprets God as a prohibition. Moreover, the confused form moral law. So it's confused, we don't understand it, we don't understand what's before us. So compromise the laws of nature that the philosopher must not speak. So cannot speak about natural laws, but only of eternal truth. So again, it goes right into the heart of philosophy, which is has been massively concerned with these eternal truths. So the question, what is truth? Whereas the question that's raised here are the natural laws. What are the natural laws? And then he gives that, as you said, that quote, the application. The word law to natural things seems to be metaphorical. And so it kind of has a kind of a resemblance, but no more than that. And he says, and the ordinary meaning of the law is simply a command. Oh no, sorry, that's something else. That's probably that is Spinoza, isn't it? And then that's Nietzsche. So Nietzsche says concerning chemistry, the science of antidotes and poisons, one must beware of the word law, which is a moral aftertaste.
Well, this is actually going to be confusing now because I'm going back through and trying to find where the rule of three actually is said, and it's fascinating. Give me a moment. Sorry. Okay. This is actually a reference to, because god damn it, everything just needs to be fucking difficult. I hate this shit so much. So you're right in that it's not a reference to, there's a lot of threes in Spinoza. So I think here, Deleuze's, and I really wish he fucking would source all of these things. There's a part at the beginning of a piece Spinoza wrote called On Opinion, Belief, and Knowledge. I'm just going to read it because it's about the rule of three, the mathematical rule of three, that the second number multiplied by a third divided by the first, a fourth number will be obtained, which has the same relation to the third, and the second has to be the first. This is it's an old like magic trick that you may have heard as a child. Like, now if I take, what's a number? What's day of birth? Oh, look, it's this number, and I do this. The fourth number can be obtained, having the same relation to the third as the second has to the first. This is kind of this mathematical rule. So I'm just, as a thing, it's important, but here's the paragraph. To make all of this clearer and more intelligible, we shall give the following illustration taken from the Rule of Three. Someone has just heard it said that if, in the rule of three, the second number is multiplied by the third, divided by the first, fourth number then be obtained, which has the same relation to the third as the second has to the first. Notwithstanding the possibility that he who put this before him might have been lying, he still made his calculations accordingly, and he did so without having acquired any more knowledge of the rule of three than a blind man has of colors, so that whatever he may have said about it, he simply repeated as a parrot repeats, not what it had been taught. Another, having more active intelligence, is not satisfied with mere hearsay, but tests by calculations. When he finds they agree with it, he gives credence. But we have rightly said that this one also is subject to error, for how can he possibly be sure his experience of a few particulars can serve him as a rule for all? Take a third man, who is not satisfied with hearsay, because it may deceive, nor with a few particulars, because this cannot possibly serve as a rule, examines it in the light of true reason, which, when properly applied, is never deceived. This then tells him on account of the nature of the proportion in the numbers, it has to be so, and could not happen otherwise. A fourth man, however, having clearest knowledge of all, has no need of hearsay, experience, or reasoning, because by his penetration he sees the proportion in all calculations immediately. This is a discussion of how knowledge, opinion, and belief are formed, and this is the reference, I think, at this point. It feels like this is a reference Deleuze is making here, because this is from a piece that filters into ethics. This is where we get into really annoying shit that Deleuze doesn't fucking make every note. But this is a thing I'm seeing a lot of people referencing when talking about the rule of three in Spinoza, is this way that he talked about opinion, belief, and knowledge utilizing the rule of three. And that that the rules and how they operate, how laws operate, seems to be what people are saying this is about. So when we say, just to come back, if we do not understand the rule of three, we will apply it, adhere to it as a duty. If we don't understand it, have that we adhere to it, we presume. Adam does not understand the rule of the relation to his body of the fruit, so he interprets God's word as prohibition. He hears law and appears and sees the you must. This is the difference of good and evil versus good bad, when we see the opposition of values versus the qualitative difference of modes of existence. We see this sort of difference in how people sort of deal with these things and handle them if they're unaware of all of the parts that are going into it. That's probably short said long, but there's very few places in anywhere in Nietzsche's text I can find that the word law or rules of this kind intersects with the rule of three, let alone the rule of three specifically capitalized in and re-referenced later in ethics, by the way, in these sections. So that's confusing and awful. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree. I mean, I don't think. I mean, I feel that the one I gave seems to fit in with this paragraph, though, because it's about how one lives, and previous one as well, how one should live one's life. And I think the point seems to be, so if we take, I mean, I might be right. Like I say, I came across that kind of quote you read out, that kind of idea, that mathematical rule of three, but that's not Spinoza's rule of three, or, although he doesn't say, as you say,
Spinoza doesn't have a rule of three. That's the problem.
No, I think he does actually. So
really,
yeah.
Where just because I want to find it. Pop a link in here. I just would like to.
I mean, I think I haven't got a link to it. I just copied it, and I didn't bother to kind of. Sorry about this.
Jan's got it. 3 rules of living.
Yeah. So the rule of three is. So I think the point is that, as you were saying, that it's not to do with whether or not this is the correct rule. It's to do whether we take the rule as an imperative, an imperative, or stronger than imperative. So you must. I think that's the point. It's not whether which rule is the rule. I think that's it's interesting, but I think that's what you I think what you were saying. I think it's fundamentally it's about we take a rule. So a rule which will help us improve our lives. So in this rule, Spinoza's rule of three here, one should accommodate ordinary ways of speaking without one should enjoy pleasures in moderation, and one should seek instrumental goods insofar as necessary for health and social acceptability. So again, we could, if we don't understand. So we could take that as a kind of, again, as a law. We must live our lives according to this. That I don't know. That seems to fit in, but I mean, definitely could be wrong. So
Yeah,
I
me
think the
too.
point
This is a I love this shit. It's always fun.
but I think the point is that we take, it's taken. I think it is an ethical way of living one's life. It's not dependent on these transcendent values, which are unchanging. We cannot change. They're kind of ethical choices of how one lives one's life. One can choose to live a good life, or one can choose to live a poor life. And I think that so.
Yeah, but they don't choose. Again, I'm gonna be very. People don't choose. I don't think that's what he's saying at all.
Well, I'm sorry, but if we don't choose, then what is? I mean, I think that's the point. The point is that there must be a choice. I would say within this, there must be. I mean, this is the kind of ethical thing. You could say, this is the kind of route you will go down. You can choose this or you can choose that. It's otherwise it's like predestination. I think that would be the alternative. It's like, well, you're predetermined to live a bad life, so why bother? Just live a bad life then, or this is completely different from that. It's getting away from that kind of these kind of transcendent values.
I would say so. I will say that the answer to your question, well, then what is it, is where this book is going to go. I'm not going to answer it today because there is a bunch of stuff that's going to be said in this way, but to be very much to me, to go back a little bit, this is where I would say, if it is that we have choice, the challenge is, quote, the conditions under which we know things and are conscious of ourselves condemn us to only have inadequate ideas that are confused, mutilated, and effects separated from causes. That's why it is scarcely possible to think little children are happy or that the first man was perfect. Ignorant of causes and natures, reduced to the consciousness of events, condemned to undergo effects, they are slaves to everything, anxious and unhappy in proportion to their imperfection. This is core to not just Deleuze's sort of project, but this is Spinoza, for sure Spinoza. And this is why the line, again, consciousness is a dream with one's eyes open. You don't have control. You're not in control of your dreams. Like we pretend we have control or make choice, but you don't choose what happens in your dreams any more than an infant believes he freely wants milk. And a drunk believes he is free from the decision of the mind when he says things later. Oh, that's what I really wanted to say. I can't believe I wish I hadn't. Like it's the illusions of these things, the illusion of free decrees, as Spinoza calls it, throughout it. Determinism and choice is not the thing, because this is part of the dichotomy of body-mind. And Deleuze, through Spinoza, and Spinoza very much, I believe, but through this, we are going to get through answering that. So I would just say, go with your reading, keep open to mine, because I'll be open to yours as we make our way through, but I think he's going to answer those questions. Because the whole point...
But what you've just said, I think, completely goes against what we've read. Because
I think it goes 100% in line with what we've read.
Well, the point is,
I literally read parts from this.
Okay, what you just said is the kind of what Deleuze is about in the previous section is a devaluation of consciousness.
Yes.
And all those illusions you talked about are the illusions of consciousness. They're not what we naturally have. It's what we are kind of unaware of. It's through a kind of a lack of understanding, and they're also the other.
Consciousness is literally what we're aware of, though.
It's but it's kind of false. It's false. It's a false consciousness, which opens us up to being manipulated by tyrants, and also, by the kind of God's command. I think this whole point of this, I mean, if it is about a kind of fact we are powerless.
It's not that we're powerless. It's not. I didn't say that.
No. I think you're implying powerlessness.
Nope.
You're saying we don't have a choice. Therefore, we lack power.
I
The whole point of this, as I've
I don't
said
think
before,
choice exists in that
hang
way.
on, and let me just finish. Let me just finish. Then I'll just shut up. But the point of this is to do with power. This is the power of the conatus. This is what's been spoken about.
So,
Okay, I finished.
so for me, choice is different than how you're describing it. We're talking about different things, and I'm saying in this case, what Spinoza's talking about, the idea of an infant who's choosing to want milk doesn't exist. Like the choice isn't there. The conception of the consciousness that does make the choice is the idea of the singular soul. It is the Christian thing. It's the thing that he's diminishing here is the idea of consciousness as being that sort of primacy. The devaluing of the consciousness in favor of thought is what's happening here. The consciousness, basically, sort of what he's saying is that what we see is different than thought. What we experience is different than thought. What we experience is really the car driving down the road, the thinking of that, and what we do beyond that. Like separating those things out is a big deal. This is the deal. The idea of decrees, will and its effects, moving the body, dominating the passions, but we don't know what a body can do. This is the drive he's making. Again, I'll keep open, but I think there's I do have a very different read. It's clear.
Yeah, I think that for me the interpretation I have is that the Spinoza is saying that to be the most free is to realize that you're not free. You don't have an agency. We're making choices, and the power is understanding what power you do have, and going along with that. So that may sound like a passivity, but
I'm with JK on this one. It's different, and it's again, we're literally still at the beginning of the book. It's not a gigantic book, but we're not even halfway through. So there's a lot that's going to be said here, sort of up front, and then make its way through that we'll be able to discuss. Because this is practical philosophy is the goal here. This is not going to be a head in the clouds discussion. It's starting a little bit that way, but this is very much about the practicality of philosophy, like practical philosophy of Spinoza and that. So it's going to come back around. So, and I don't mean to interrupt so much, Derek. I get really into it because it's fun back and forth.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's interesting. Yeah, it's how we can see the same thing very differently. But yeah, let's continue.
Let's do it. Let's do the last paragraph of this, and we'll probably finish off here. So it'll be this paragraph discussion, and we'll be done. It is easy, however, to separate the two domains, that of the eternal truths of nature and that of the moral laws of institutions, if only one considers their effects. Let us take consciousness at its word. Moral law is an imperative. It has no other effect, no other finality than obedience. This obedience may be absolutely necessary and the commands may be justified, but that is not the issue. Law, whether moral or social, does not provide us with any knowledge. It makes nothing known. At worst, it prevents the formation of knowledge, the law of the tyrant. At best, it prepares for knowledge and makes it possible, the law of Abraham or of Christ. Between these two extremes, it takes the place of knowledge in those who, because of their mode of existence, are incapable of knowledge, the law of Moses. But in any case, a difference of nature is constantly manifested between knowledge and morality, between the relation of command and obedience, and the relation of the known and the unknown. The relation of the known and knowledge. The tragedy of theology and its harmfulness are not just speculative, according to Spinoza. They are owing to the practical confusion with theology, which theology instills in us between these two orders that differ in nature. At least, theology considers that Scripture lays the foundation for knowledge, even if this knowledge must be developed in a rational manner, or even translated by reason. Whence the hypothesis of a moral, creating, and transcendent God. In this we shall see there is a confusion that compromises the whole of ontology, the history of a long error whereby the command is mistaken for something to be understood, obedience for knowledge itself, and being for a fiat. Law is always the transcendent instance that determines the opposition of values, good, evil, but knowledge is always the immanent power that determines the qualitative difference of modes of existence. I won't start here. There's a lot to be said.
But yeah, so he starts by saying it's easy to separate the two domains, and I think the two domains are the domain of nature, I think, and the domain of the moral or the theological or God. So if only one considers their effects. So then he goes through consciousness again. Let's take consciousness at its word, moral law. So this is the kind of law of consciousness, is an imperative. It has no other effect, no other finality than obedience. This obedience may be absolutely necessary and the commands may be justified, but that is not the issue. So a law might be like a very necessary thing, and it's the commands the thing that it enjoins you must do may be justified, but he said that's not the issue. He said law, whether moral or social, does not provide us with, it doesn't provide us any knowledge. It makes nothing known. At worst, it prevents the formation of knowledge. So that a law it makes nothing known. I think it lacks knowledge. And again, goes right back to the beginning of this chapter when he says, we don't know what a body can do, so we lack knowledge. So again, this is the knowledge or the lack of knowledge of consciousness, that it lacks knowledge. It makes nothing known. At worst, it prevents formation of knowledge, and this is the law of the tyrant. At best, it prepares for knowledge and makes it possible for. So at worst, it's the law of the tyrant. At best, it prepares us for knowledge and makes it possible. And the law of Abraham or of Christ. So these are kind of preparatory to knowledge. So these laws prepare us for something, and between these it takes a place of knowledge in those who, because their mode of existence, are incapable of knowledge. And so he calls this the law of Moses, i.e. the law that their commands that you must not, thou shalt not, etc. But in any case, a difference of nature is constantly manifest between knowledge and morality. So there is this difference between knowledge, to know something, and then the morality, which you don't know. You just know it's the law. Between the relation of command and obedience and the relation of the known and knowledge. Tragedy of theology and its harmfulness are not just speculative, according to Spinoza. They're into the practical confusion. Which theology? So it's a practical confusion. Again, it's relation to how one lives one's life. I would say. I think that I was personally read this notion of practical as practical for oneself. How one lives one's life. Which theology instills in us between these two orders that differ in nature. At the least, theology considers that Scripture lays the foundation for knowledge, even if knowledge must be developed in a rational manner. So the foundation of knowledge is Scripture, these imperatives. But even if this knowledge, which we have, must be developed in a rational manner, either through reasoning, or even translated by reason, whence the hypothesis on moral created and transcendent God. So this is a hypothesis. This is a kind of, theoretical, as an hypothesis, that one can think. He says in this, as we see, there's a confusion that comprises the whole of ontology. So ontology is a kind of study of being, the history of a long era, whereby the command is mistaken for something to be understood. So the command is something, we must understand what's being commanded. Obedience, an obedience for knowledge itself, and being for a fiat. A fiat is a kind of decree, a decree that's issued. So the being is a decree. And again, that's slightly obscure. Not slightly, quite obscure. Anyway, but law is. So I think what he wants to talk about what law is. Law is always the transcendent instance that determines the opposition of values. So this is good and evil, which Spinoza replaced with good and bad. but knowledge is always the immanent power. So there's something that's power and immanent to ourselves, a power immanent to ourselves that allows us to determine the qualitative. I put the word "allow" in notice. Allows determines the qualitative difference of modes of existence. So it allows us to kind of make our own judgment, I kind of think, about the qualitative difference of modes of existence between good and bad.
So basically, is this passage, this paragraph about how law actually prevents us from knowledge of, you know, and that it sets up a system where you have to use reason to interpret those kind of laws and edicts, from the past, the scripture and so forth. And so he says that the history of a long error, this is a history of a long error whereby the command is mistaken for something to be understood, obedience for knowledge itself. So in other words, instead of real knowledge, we only have obedience to certain laws that are established based on good and evil, and that right. Yeah, like that's a good example. You have traffic laws and that say do not do this, do not do that. But if you have knowledge, right? If you have knowledge and understanding, you can bypass those laws and get away with it, right? Um, exactly.
Yeah, that was good. Enjoyed that. I like robust discussions.